We begin, as feels appropriate, with Paradise Lost. It would be an intellectual oversight to attempt an overview of the Western canon without first acknowledging the architectural majesty of John Milton. I'm Silas Mordaunt, Dr. Silas Mordaunt, Associate Professor of Literature. I must caution you, as the administration has seen fit to compel me to present my lectures here for mass consumption, the emphasis on archival and bibliographic metaphors is intentional. It reflects an institutional tendency to apprehend literature primarily through its modes of organization, libraries, indexes, archives, rather than through interpretive or ethical or moral engagement. By adopting this vocabulary to excess, I render my literary knowledge legible to administrative logic while refusing its simplifications. Thus, I offer you this forensic audit of the grandest failure in celestial history. My thesis is one that you will not find in the spark-noted margins of your educational texts. My thesis is that Milton's Satan is the first architect of the aesthetic lie. He is a creature who realizes with chilling precision that if one cannot possess the substance of truth, one can at least curate the spectacle of one's own ruin. Consider the morphology of this ruin as the adversary rouses himself from the burning marl. Milton presents us with a figure whose form had yet not lost all her original brightness, nor appeared less than archangel ruined, in the excess of glory obscured. Observe the calculated nature of this description. Biological decay or semiotic strategy? Satan intentionally retains enough of the original brightness to ensure he has an audience to witness its failing, or perhaps its fading. He is the original cosmic narcissist, branding his own trauma to maintain a hierarchy where he remains the focal point. He does not lament the loss of the divine. He just is simply distressed that it no longer serves as his mirror. The verticality of this despair, this sheer spatial rhetoric of the fall, is where the lie takes root. He's hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky, with hideous ruin and combustion down to bottomless perdition. For the milquetoast mind, this is merely a geographic descent. For the analyst, it is the acceleration of the ego into a void of its own making. The bottomless perdition is the stage for his performance. By emphasizing the depth of his fall, Satan attempts to quantify his importance. If the fall is infinite, he reasons, then his significance must be equally boundless. It is a desperate attempt to use the sublime to mask an ontological void. He's constructing hell as a fortress of the self, where the gravity of his own pride replaces the order of the Imperium. Which leads us to the obdurate mind, the most transparent of his rhetorical deceptions, when he proclaims that he possesses a mind not to be changed by place or time, and famously asserts that the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. He is not declaring independence. Like many, he is retreating into a psychological echo chamber, where the marginalia of his resentment becomes the primary text. To make a heaven of hell is the ultimate intellectual cowardice. It is the refusal to engage with a reality that does not center upon oneself. He has decoupled the manuscript of the soul from the author, believing that by rewriting the definitions of heaven and hell, he can escape the terminal reality of his own significance, or perhaps lack of significance. He is a man, or a spirit, who has locked himself in his own library and set fire to the index, simply so no one can tell him where he is lost. Observe the aesthetic padding the adversary employs to shore up his authority. When Milton describes the shield as massy, large, and round, likening it to the moon as seen through Galileo's telescope, the poem stages an early form of symbolic self-branding. The invocation of the Tuscan artist drags 17th century empirical reality into the epic void, turning Satan's armament into a calculated act of modern self-presentation. This is a calculated displacement of scale. Satan is using these sublime props to distract from his literal impotence. He carries a spear compared to the tallest pine, hewn on Norwegian hills, not because he intends to use it, perhaps he can't, but because he requires the visual weight of the heroic tradition to mask the fact that he is essentially a footnote in the divine narrative. His political interrogation of the potentate in heaven is equally fraudulent. He decries the tyranny of the Almighty with the specific shrill tone of a junior faculty member overlooked for a promotion. He speaks of the monarchy of heaven as if he were a populist revolutionary. Yet he demands an even more suffocating fealty from his own legion of the damned. This is the rhetoric of the professional victim. As an associate professor who has navigated the labyrinthian egos of the university corridors for far too long, I recognize the potentate argument for what it is. And that is a linguistic mask for resentment. Satan only wants to dismantle the hierarchy insofar as he can be both above and outside of it. He reframes his exile as an ideological choice because the alternative, that he was simply discarded as redundant, is a reality his narcissism cannot process. Consider the vaunt he delivers to Beelzebub, which you likely find inspiring in your wretchedly optimistic ignorance. What though the field be lost? All is not lost. The unconquerable will, and study of revenge, immortal hate, and courage never to submit or yield. This is a desperate pivot by a man who's lost the archive and now is attempting to burn the library to stay warm. The unconquerable will is a semantic ghost. Satan is using high register oratory to brand the void, attempting to convince his second in command and himself that their defeat was actually a strategic repositioning. It is a performance for an audience of one or perhaps two, a frantic attempt to maintain the architect's lie, while the literal sulphur of his failure stings his nostrils. Let's look at the infrastructure of Pandemonium. It is the ultimate exercise in sublime kitsch. They rifled the bowels of their Mother Earth for treasures better hid, to construct a gilded cage that they have the audacity to call a capital. Architecture of insecurity. Mulciber, the fallen architect, builds a space that rose like an exhalation, a structure of gold and fretted cornices that serves only to highlight the hollowness of the inhabitants. It is the 18th century folly writ large upon the landscape of hell. Satan creates this sprawling, gaudy archive of his own vanity because he fears the silence of the pit. He requires a palace to convince himself that he is still a prince, much like this university requires state-of-the-art digital centers to convince itself it is still a place of learning. Both are merely expensive lids on very empty jars. Or, to use a perhaps more relatable turn of phrase, blank pages within a gilded leather tome. The darkness visible, perhaps the most famous oxymoron in the text, and predictably the most misunderstood. Milton describes the pit as a place where there is no light, but rather darkness visible, served only to discover sights of woe. This is a description of a total semiotic rupture. In the divine order, light is the medium of truth, the transparency through which the Creator is known and shown. In the adversary's domain, he has achieved the ultimate perversion. He has made the absence of truth a tangible, visible thing. It is a palpable, obscure, a darkness you can touch, because it is composed of the very ego that refuses to reflect any light. Satan manufactures hell as a stage where his faded splendor can be the only point of reference. He has created a world where the only thing you can see is the magnitude of what has been lost. He is curating lack. Which brings us to that most abused line in the English language, typically invoked by those for whom quotations functions as a substitute for thought. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. No cry for autonomy here. To reign and avoid is to be the subject of nothingness, the sovereign of nothingness. By choosing the reign, the adversary chooses the isolation of the self over the participation in the absolute. He's opting for a closed system, could we say an archive, with only one entry written by himself. This is the ultimate intellectual cowardice. He'd rather be the supreme authority of a dumpster than a student of the infinite. It is a sentiment I find increasingly prevalent amongst my colleagues, who prefer the authority of their tiny, specialized subcommittees to the actual pursuit of truth, that rather rule their dusty cubicles than acknowledge the sun. Do not be deceived by the romantic reading of the satanic hero. It is a trap for the lazy, those who mistake volume for depth. Those who see the adversary as a protagonist are falling for the same PR campaign he runs for his own legions. He utilizes a heroic frame to mask an ontological void. When he stands like a tower, his form is a hollow shell. He is imitating the posture of greatness without possessing the moral weight that gives that posture meaning. He is a costume drama rebel, a mannequin, draped in the heavy velvet of epic convention. He speaks of honor and glory. But these are empty signifiers in the pit, decoupled from any grounding reality. He has created a rhetorical space where evil can be his good simply because he has the loudest and perhaps the only voice in the room. Observe the shifting scale of the narcissist. Throughout the text, the adversary is subject to a humiliating physical contraction that mirrors his moral decay. He begins as a leviathan, a creature so vast that his other parts besides, prone on the flood, extended long and large, lay floating many a rood. This is the peak of his aesthetic lie, the illusion of grandeur. Yet as the narrative progresses, the architect begins to shrink. By the time he reaches the garden, he's forced to inhabit the body of a toad and then a serpent. This is the inevitable trajectory of the ego. The more space it claims for its own narrative, the less actual room it occupies in the hierarchy of being. He becomes a microscopic speck of resentment, a dot of ink on a vast blank page, if you will. If you cannot see the path from architect to squatting toad, then you are precisely the kind of viewer the administration had in mind when they asked for accessible content. Consider the soliloquy on the Mount in Book 9. It is here that the architect's life finally experiences a structural collapse. Standing alone, away from his sycophantic legions, the mask of the heroic rebel slips to reveal the hell within him. He admits, with a terrifying lucidity, that which way I fly is hell. Myself am hell. Well, this is the ultimate fruition of his earlier boast that his mind is its own place, that everyone's mind is their own place. He has succeeded in creating his own reality, only to find it as a torture chamber. The atavistic frequency of his pride has tuned out the divine harmony, leaving him with nothing but the feedback loop of his own resentment. He acknowledges that pride and worse ambition threw me down. Yet he is so committed to his own brand of unconquerable will that he views repentance as an inconsistency. He would rather perish in a masterpiece of his own making than live as a minor character in God's. This leads directly to his envy of the unmade. Having realized he cannot truly reign, he can only suffer with a title. The adversary turns his attention to the creatures of clay. His hatred for Adam and Eve is purely aesthetic. He resents their new-grown perfection because it reminds him of the totality he discarded. He views the garden through the lens of a failed artist, looking at a masterpiece he could never replicate. When he observes them, he speaks of melted pity, but it is the pity of a predator. He decides not to destroy them for any strategic advantage whatsoever. His reasoning for destroying them is to prove that the architect of the lie can still exert influence over the archive of the real. If he cannot create, he will edit the world into a tragedy, and here we encounter the serpent's syntax, the linguistic corruption used during the temptation. He asks Eve, "Indeed, hath God then said that of the fruit of all these garden trees you shall not eat?" He introduces the concept of the interrogation into a world that had previously only known affirmation. He deconstructs divine law by treating it as a text open to interpretation. He offers Eve a higher knowledge that is actually just the same fractured perspective he possesses, a metatextual awareness that separates the signifier from the signified. By the time he is finished, the Word of God has been reduced to a mere suggestion of God, and the garden has become a site of rupture. One must ask if the adversary possesses any true agency, or if he's merely a necessary instrument in the justification of the ways of God to men. My colleagues in the theology department, bless their hearts, often debate this with the fervour of children arguing over a board game. However, the literature reveals a darker truth. Satan's rebellion is perfectly accounted for in the divine archive. He is the darkness visible that makes the light discernible. Every willful act of defiance he commits is merely another stanza in a poem he didn't write. His tragedy is that he's a utility. He's the necessary other in a narrative that requires a conflict to achieve its sublime resolution. Observe the final wretched morphology of the serpent. The towering stature of the first book, that vertical monument to ego, has been utterly liquidated. He is forced to inhabit the constricted form of a snake, not with indented wave prone on the ground as since, but on his rear circular base of rising folds that towered fold above fold a surging maze. Even here he attempts to maintain an aesthetic of complexity, a searching maze, to distract from the base reality that he is hiding in a beast of the field. It is the ultimate humiliation for the architect of the lie, to be reduced to a creature that must literally taste the dust of the archive he tried to burn. His physical contraction is now complete. He has shrunk from a celestial titan to a garden pest, proving that the trajectory of the narcissist is always toward the microscopic. This brings us to the hissing archive. Upon his return to hell, expecting a standing ovation, The adversary finds his oratorical power stripped away by a higher editor. As he begins to speak, he hears on all sides, from innumerable tongues, a dismal universal hiss, the sounds of public scorn. He and his entire host are transformed into serpents. Their language, the very tools they can use to deconstruct reality, is replaced by a cacophonous void. They are punished in the shape he sinned, turned into a literal manifestation of their own poisonous rhetoric. It is a moment of profound cosmic irony. The great orator is silenced, as always, not by a counter-argument, but by the erasure of the medium itself. The archive's been closed, the only sound remaining is the friction of scales against the floor. The result is the sublime void. We are left with the Miltonic Satan as a fragmented archetype of the self, a being who chased a totality he could no longer inhabit. He is the cautionary tale for any intellectual who believes their own curation of reality is superior to the reality itself. He is a hollowed-out signifier, a shell of faded splendor that exists only to remind us of the danger of the closed mind. He attempted to build a kingdom on the foundation of an aesthetic lie, and he ended as a mute spectator to his own irrelevance. He is the ultimate career academic, forever proximal to greatness, but fundamentally excluded from it by the weight of his own unconquerable pride. Allow me to conclude my argument here. I assume readers of discernment will perceive why the essay is so liberally stocked with archival metaphor. You have been presented with the scaffolding of a superior intellect. Do try not to lean too heavily upon it. This concludes the introductory session of our forensic audit of the Western and perhaps universal canon. The metatextual analysis is only going to get deeper, assuming you possess the requisite endurance. I have fulfilled the university's mandate for this episode. If you feel the strange reflexive urge to interact with the interface, I suggest you click the subscription button twice in rapid succession to ensure you don't clutter your carefully curated feedback loop of video logs and images of cats. Keep your cognitive faculties sharp, or at the very least, keep them out of my way. This was Deep Metatextual Analysis with Dr. Silas Mordaunt.